Welcome to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben, where each week it's my great pleasure to meet fascinating people who tell us about the challenges they're facing with their work-life balance. I'm Dr. Ben Sinclair, and I wonder, do you struggle with your priorities? On the one hand, focusing on your work, business or career, namely your wealth, or on the other hand, looking after your health, which is so important. Over the past 20 years as a GP, I've seen many people spending too long on their screens, cutting corners on their sleep, diet or exercise. The result? Their work life's going well, but their health can suffer. I sincerely hope that my guests' personal and professional experiences may help you to improve your own health and life. Welcome to Health versus Wealth with me, Dr. Ben, where I talk to people who are having health and wealth challenges in their lives. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Michael Andrews, a management consultant with Alex Partners. Michael, great to see you.
Good to see you, Ben.
Thank you for coming in. And we actually met each other through a long COVID clinic. And I have to confess to the listeners that I am your doctor and you are also my patient.
Absolutely.
And just so that we know exactly, the boundaries of the conversation. Now, you're a highly successful management consultant. You advise people and their businesses on how to improve and how to balance their wealth. And you've faced some health issues recently. Can you tell me a bit more about what's been happening with you?
Absolutely. 2 years ago, almost to the day, I caught COVID during a particularly intense project with some clients.
Right.
And I remember just sort of pushing myself to a big presentation and then suddenly thinking, I've definitely got it. My family have got it back home. Went and got tested and I remember just feeling like I'd hit the wall. And then for the next, couple of weeks or so, I've just felt completely knocked sideways. And then over the next 2 years, I've learned a huge amount about what's really been going on with my body, and it's completely transformed my health from some real acute issues with heart and lungs, which really dragged on even to the early part of this year.
Yeah.
And then some more chronic issues that have just affected how I live my life today and how I can work.
Wow. So we're going to talk a lot about long COVID and how that's affected you. Let's go pre-COVID, the pre-COVID chapter. How did you get into your current line of work and how did that all happen?
Well, I guess I never really knew what I wanted to do. I studied physics as a student.
Okay.
And
how does that fit with becoming a management consultant? That seems out of left field.
Well, I guess with physics, in a way, you can almost do anything because it's just a pure science.
Right.
So it doesn't link into anything. And with management consultancy, I think a lot of people come to it through either experience or they're trained up on the job. And there's a lot of engineers who do management consultancy because it's quite a logical sort of structured approach. But yes, it's a little bit unusual. And I did consider science, but actually there isn't much of a career in science. And I knew, even early days, that there was a certain way of life I wanted or I aspired to, how I lived. And I thought, actually, science is going to help me with that. Long story short, I guess I explored a few different careers. I'd had a couple of years in a startup in the early 2000s, a digital startup. I understood at that point I'm not an entrepreneur, but I have an entrepreneurial side.
Okay, I like that, yeah.
And then after that, I suddenly realised that I love projects. I love solving people's problems. I like learning. So being in a career where you are faced with new challenges all the time, consulting just sort of, there's this big light almost called me.
And that was the moment. Wow.
Yeah.
And I think like me, you also toyed with the idea of being in the forces.
Yes.
I looked at that when I was at university and was blowing things up and shooting at targets. And I think we connected quite a lot over that sort of lifestyle, didn't we?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that was one of the things I thought actually I'd do until I realised that the military life, there's even an interesting story. I went to Sandhurst to a ball just before I was due to go. And this colonel's wife, who was the commandant at the time, maybe I shouldn't say too much, don't want to get into trouble, but
go on,
at this ball, I was standing next to a great friend of mine, and she just turned to this friend and said, look, if you love him, don't let him come. The army is not what it used to be.
Wow.
And it just stuck with me. I thought, oh my gosh, this is probably the career that is most suited to me, but I'm not sure it's the lifestyle that's right for me and my family, even though I had no idea what family I was going to have.
Yes.
It was 15 years later until I met my wife, but
interesting.
It changed
your direction, and you went off. And I had a similar experience where I looked at the army, and at the time I just met my now wife, and I thought I could have adventures with the army, but I won't be seeing her, so I'm going to have adventures with her and not with the army. And I went another direction as well.
But it's very similar, yeah.
Yeah, very similar.
I did spend 10 years with the what's now the Army Reserves, and I would say it was one of the best experiences from a business perspective and a personal perspective. And I did huge amounts of interesting things, met some great people, and it taught me a huge amount.
And I think that camaraderie and teamwork, there's
Absolutely.
nothing like it. It's never experienced anything like it before or since.
No.
So I do miss that.
Yeah, me too.
Now, you advise businesses. So, you're trying to help people grow business. I know you're quite an international jet setter before you got COVID. Yes. So do you have any tips for people who are, currently in business, who are listening to the podcast, who are trying to juggle their health and wealth and running their own businesses?
Wow. Where to start? I think, so maybe putting it in the context of what I've learned over the last 2 years, it's all about prioritizing both the sort of the self, the family, and work, whether it be you are the employer or you are an employee. I think really understanding those three different dimensions and then prioritizing what's really important to you on all of those fronts and creating a balance between those. Before I got COVID, I think I did a fair job at that, but what's different now is back then, I didn't feel like I had any limitations. I obviously did, but I didn't feel, I knew I could push myself. So I was always pushing on every front.
Okay.
Probably overstretching myself. Didn't feel it at the time. So now it's very much, I'm so acutely aware of my limitations. So that prioritization is right at the forefront of everything I do every day. And it's a great skill to have. I think if I'd had it before COVID, I would have been even more effective. And I don't think I'm moderately effective, but
of course,
but I would have been I would have been much more effective if I really thought through that and started each day with that.
Interesting. So success isn't just about productivity; it's about effectiveness.
Yeah.
And actually, so if you ruthlessly prioritise the things you really feel you need to do, you may become more effective while still being successful.
Absolutely, but it is I think it's an interesting balance because, we, particularly in the modern world where there's so much around us happening all the time, the ability to actually cut out the noise, take that step back. Actually, this is a good skill that you learn in the military, is you do have to take a step back. Give yourself time and your team's time to really think through what's in front of you, both short term and long term, and then prioritize and plan against that, accepting you can't do everything. And that's probably one of the biggest learnings. I think from a military perspective, you're always taught that. You know you can't do everything, so you have to focus. But in life, I don't think I ever really used that. I think I always thought, no, you can do anything and everything.
Yeah. But
now I realise, actually, no, there are limitations. And so you have to really be, ruthless in prioritising, as you say.
Long COVID is a hard teacher, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've both been through that.
Yeah.
And in school you're told, work hard and you will succeed and you can have everything you want.
Yes.
But actually, long COVID smacks these huge limitations on what you can and can't do, all your different abilities. Let's think about the sort of the post-COVID era now in terms of you. How have you had to adapt your life in the light of this?
Wow. Again, where to start? I think it should build on what you said. Dealing with long COVID is counterintuitive to definitely my own behaviours. So I've had to learn a lot about how to really change behaviours, which is hard. But at the same time of just dealing with an illness that leaves you unable to really, you can't think straight, you can't focus, you have no energy to do anything, you struggle to get up. So actually to change behaviours under those conditions is quite difficult. Yeah, I think the first thing, and it sounds crazy, the first thing I learnt to do was actually to stop and rest. And I remember conversations with you very early on and the plethora of doctors I was seeing at the time for the various issues. They all said, you just need to rest. And I didn't know how to do that. I thought resting was maybe going for a run or learning something or doing something.
Yes.
Actually, there was one that said, just be. Stop doing, just be. And I never thought about that. I thought, well, how do you just be?
And like you said, it's actually an active thing. You have to resist doing to be.
Exactly.
And so it's not something we're taught, just to be.
No. And I'm not sure whether it was yourself or it was another doctor recommended this great book called Teach Us to Sit Still. And it was about a middle-aged bloke who had a bit of a health issue, who went on this journey. And it made me really pause to think, oh, okay, this is what it means. And actually that, with your guidance, has opened up the door to meditation. Still early days, but without that, I struggle to get up in the morning and actually start the day.
And what I've been impressed with is how dedicated you've been at implementing so many different techniques in your life, that I've seen you come back and say, hey, you started a long COVID support group, and you meet with other people who have this as well. That must involve accountability, sharing shared experience, ideas.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating that even though you've had this, you've actually been quite productive during a chronic illness, and also in your desire to get back to some semblance of normality or sort of regular life.
Yeah.
Long COVID questions our definition of normal.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's something, and probably in from a business context as well. I think I have an inner belief that there's always a reason where something is happening. There's something to learn from this, and I've been on a very much a sort of mental psychological journey through this of understanding it. But the starting point has always been, what can I learn from this? What do I need to learn from this? And then how do I try and change? And it's the same approach that I take with business, with my life. And I think that as a founding principle has been super helpful. But even that slightly goes against that first step, which is you've got to rest. You've got to take that step back and just be.
Yeah. And sometimes long COVID lays people so low they can't do anything else. I remember lying in bed for days, not being able to do anything, but not hear anything, not see anything, because it was too much.
Yeah.
And then coming out of the hole and then thinking, it's about survival at first.
Absolutely.
And then you might get to the stuff that we're talking about, like learning the tricks of survival or the tools of survival. What have you done to your sleep, for example, that's helped you in long COVID in the new post-COVID era for you?
So pre-COVID, I never had an issue with sleep. I could sleep pretty much whenever I wanted. And I also knew that as long as I was getting minimum 6 hours of sleep, that was fine. And I'd manage that. Post, I still haven't slept a proper night's sleep. It's got a lot better. But I've learned some, people call it sleep hygiene. But I've got a routine now, both going to bed, getting up in the morning, that helps create the right conditions. Because it's a weird illness that seems to, whether it's the inflammation and all of that goes on in your body, that just stops your brain from being able to function and just switch off.
Absolutely.
So that sleep hygiene is being really important.
And we end up, ironically, sort of hyperstimulated at the wrong time of day with long COVID, and waking up at sort of 10 or 11 and finding that we then can't go to sleep when we want to go to sleep, or we're waking up in the night. And it's a bit like having a baby. Suddenly you wake up all hours of the day and night, you don't know where you are. And how many hours do you need to try and get a good sleep out of a night now?
So I probably have a 12-hour window that I aim to focus on what I call sleep, but actually that's about an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half as part of the sort of the go-to bed routine.
Yeah.
And there's about equivalent time in the morning. But I need a good, probably solid 10 hours in bed where I know I'll get sufficient sleep, even though I'm not sleeping solidly through that. But it is getting better. There's patterns that are starting to form.
Yeah.
You can see that it's rather than this crazy up and down.
Yeah. And we both wear these Aura rings, which
should be sponsored, I think.
That we should, shouldn't we? Now they help us to track, our steps, our oxygen levels, our heart rates, our sleep, and very helpful to sort of look back on trends and see how things you've done in life have affected your sleep. Absolutely.
It gives you a sort of score each day.
I love that.
And everything else, you get so bombarded with all kinds of information.
Yep.
The one thing I look at every day is that.
Yeah,
and it tells me, can I do what I had planned? could I even do a little bit more? Or more normally it's start taking stuff out. Make sure you've got your rest in today.
Ruthlessly prioritise.
Absolutely, yeah.
The day I woke up on my third mountain in the Three Peaks, and my watch told me that my body battery was 5, and I had to climb Snowdon. I thought, well, I'm just going to have to do this because I couldn't do anything else. But I did pay for it later, and I got ill. It's surprisingly accurate how they, predict from the fact that I'd had 2 hours sleep in a van probably didn't help. And so I wasn't following my own advice, but it was for a particular charitable cause that I was proud to be raising for.
But that's a really good point is, and we talk about prioritization, I'm also learning, and I always thought I was quite flexible before, but I was actually more flexible to the detriment of myself, whereas now I'm learning to be a bit more flexible with all of this. I mean, there's that great line, everything in moderation, even moderation. And if I want to do something that I know is going to push me a bit too far, that's okay, because I just need to make more time over the next few days to do that, to accommodate that.
So you put in things around that to allow for that, rather than it being sort of an impact.
Absolutely.
Now, I remember you told me about a business trip, I think one of your first business trips when you went back to work, where you, and I was slightly apprehensive about this, because you said, I'm flying to New York, and I was like, what? And I was thinking, okay, altitude, long COVID, maybe a microclotting disorder, so we may have blood clots, we're at high altitude, low oxygen, how's he going to fare with the flight? And all these things started popping up in my head. You very sensibly worked out with your company a way to mitigate this to still be effective. I was really impressed how you did that. Tell me how that went.
Well, that went really well. Actually, this Sunday I'm flying out to New York as well. So, but flying on a Sunday, I used to have rules that weekends were sacred, away from work. But that's something I'm willing to give, and they essentially give me an extra day when I land, so that I have time to really acclimatise and refill that tank. So I'm then ready to operate in New York. I mean, it's something I didn't even think about.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people are flying, even today, doing the red-eye flights and just straight into the office, whereas now I know, no, I've got to have a day when I land and a day when I get home to really refill that tank.
Fantastic. And I mean, anyone who travels intercontinentally is going to have time shifts. They're going to have changes in their hormones. Melatonin might be useful to adjust that. Body clock. There's so many things. Are there any particular things that you do when you land? I mean, for example, I used to fly a lot to Bangkok to work in Cambodia, and I would land, I would go straight and get a massage, I would then eat and go to sleep in the new time zone, then get up in the new time zone, and I kind of felt better when I did that. Coming home is a nightmare, but is there anything that you do, like that when you fly to another time zone?
Well, actually now, let's take this upcoming trip. I know that I will try and keep my body clock as close to the UK time, keep my body clock as close to the UK as possible.
So you keep yourself pegged on UK time through the whole trip?
As well, it has probably got an hour or two wiggle at the end.
That's pretty impressive.
But then I try and get to bed then at 6 o'clock in New York time. Because that gives me the ability to have then that 12-hour window where I can really try and optimize and get my sleep, and then get up and deliver. So there are a few other things about just really making sure that I do my breathing much more religiously, because I find that is the way, without doing that in the morning, I've struggled to really be on.
Yeah, and we very much connected over cold water and Wim Hof breathing and box breathing as well. Yeah. You're signed up to go to a breathwork retreat, aren't you? I'm so jealous. Tell us about that.
Look, this is part of, I think, off the back of long COVID, but also great skills in life. Yeah. How to look after your mind and your body so that you can really perform. So this is a 5-day breathing, meditation, and ice bath, I guess, training session in Stockholm, or just outside of Stockholm in January. I'm super excited because I think it's just going to help the skills that I'm learning to really cement them in, so they're more effective. Again, it's as you learn, as you know, you've got to train. You've got to train to meditate and really focus on just being. And likewise with the breathing. So yes, that's going to be
amazing.
I think, a great skill for the rest of my life.
I think we talked about breath work because it controls heart rate, it lowers levels of stress hormones, it improves sleep hygiene.
Yeah.
So many positive benefits of breath work. Also opens up the blood vessels. If we think that long COVID is a blood vessel disorder, we need to really focus on improving heart health and blood vessel health. And those breath holds in Wim Hof are fantastic for doing that, releasing nitric oxide to allow the arteries to open up. And then combining that with cold water, boy, does that make you get focus in the morning and
absolutely
light up, doesn't it? I love that.
Well, with that, I find I can't actually almost operate without it. And I also think there's a link to one of the first things you recommended. Actually, I do remember one of the first questions you asked me is how holistic a thinker was I around health, which I thought was your way of just probing to see, can you offer a more holistic way? And absolutely. Yeah. And one of the first things you suggested was a hyperbaric chamber. And I mean, it was a month of that. And I found that was it's probably one of the biggest impacts it had on long COVID, because it went from this crazy brain fog where I just could not really think I could walk very far to actually after a month of that, I could think more clearly in little pockets, but had a huge difference. And I think that the breathing we do is a great way of doing that on a daily basis and at lower intensity.
You've been quite positive about your employer, AlixPartners,
Absolutely.
In this. Tell me more about what does a good employer look like in terms of looking after someone who's suffering from long COVID?
Great question. And I don't think there's a single answer other than to say it's about communication and about being open to maybe a slightly different approach. And this is where I think AlixPartners has really excelled in that there is a legal requirement. So with our what we call our people team, our HR team, we've been super helpful and making sure that we do everything by the book. But even throughout, right from the start, it's been a conversation between myself and various colleagues, particularly in the head of UK, in really looking at, well, what can I actually do? What am I able to do? And then how best can they then use me? And what do I want to do? And it's been a really open conversation around that. So the basis has been, what do we need put in place? And then it's, okay, so what do you want to do? What can you do? And so, I mean, even now, throughout the sort of, let's say, a year of steadily building up my capacity, they almost just said to me, how can you be useful? Go and be useful, and giving me a bit of freedom to do that. And that's quite a novel approach for an employer to almost say, well, I don't have the answer. Normally, I think a lot of people say, well, we'll put you on sort of light duties, or we'll just sort of maybe give you some administrative work to do.
But this course,
and that's not very fulfilling, particularly for people who are motivated and have aspirations and have ambition. So giving that, and there was a balance here. And sometimes Mark, our head of UK, was saying, you need to temper yourself here. And that was really helpful.
Yes.
Helping me to manage myself as well.
And not put pressure on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, and actually, I tried to go back to work 2 or 3 times after long COVID, and my boss kept saying, well, you look ready. Are you ready? And I was like, I'm ready, because I'm like you. I just want to go,
Let's go.
And then, but I didn't know what I couldn't do until I found out that I couldn't do it.
Exactly.
And so in the end, we sort of agreed on a long phased return with adjusted duties. And long COVID is now being recognised as a disability.
Yeah.
And so there will be reasonable adjustments to be made by employers. And I think what you're saying essentially is that employers really have to pay attention and value their people so that they can retain them.
I think that the point about people, the individual, I think everyone, and this is probably quite difficult to do for a large corporate, but I think it boils down to the individual situation. So even now we're in the process of saying, okay, well, what is potentially the new career for me that in Alex Partners now and looking at creating a role within the requirements of the business that I can fulfill, but also that I will be fulfilled by. And that's really important. So, acknowledging and accepting as an individual that there are now limitations, but having that really valued conversation with my employer. Okay, so how can I help? How can I not just be a unit in the firm, but actually how can I still be me and use my unique skills, because everyone is unique. How can I use those skills to really help build value for our firm? And I feel really lucky to have that conversation.
And I would hope that other employers, would do the same for their valued staff members.
I do too.
And I suppose, essentially, we can't ask for more than to be able to deliver what we're good at, because that's going to bring us contentment and satisfaction.
Absolutely. And I think through this process, both Alex Partners and myself have learned actually the things that I am particularly good at, not just everything I used to do, but the things that I'm particularly good at. And we're focusing on that and trying to build a role around that, which is actually becoming really exciting. Whereas the career that I have now lost, and actually learning, grief is a big word, but I'm learning to accept that isn't possible anymore.
Yeah.
But realizing that there now is a new, interesting and exciting opportunity for me that we're working on. And so, I feel that there's a positive coming out of this, even if it's not where I want it to be.
There's a hope and a vision for the future, which
is
so important to drive us forwards and pull us forwards as well.
And to help maintain motivation for me.
Absolutely.
So that, it works. You want your team to be motivated.
Absolutely. And I know you manage a lot of people, and so they'll be looking to you for leadership. And what's interesting is, though, if this is coming from the top, the company may be changed and transformed by how they deal with you, because that will transform how they deal with everybody else.
And look, they've got history there. They have, I know from being involved in the past with others, we always look at the individual. We are a very people-orientated firm. Consulting is, our only assets are our people. So we have to look after them.
And finally, we've talked a lot about nutrition because we've both got an interest in it. I also hear that you're a bit of a Heston Blumenthal in the kitchen.
I like experimenting. I'll go that far.
What's your favourite healthy dish that you might deploy in your current lifestyle?
Healthy dish, okay. So pre-COVID, I hardly touched fish. So even my tastes have changed. I think I've become more in tune with what my body needs. A healthy dish, I love cooking salmon. I have to admit, it has to be sort of properly fresh, not farm salmon, because again,
so
you
wild
look at
salmon.
Wild salmon, you can only get it from Alaska these days,
Yep.
which is, it's appalling. But anyway, that cooking that on the barbecue, then making a sort of a herby, oniony, apple cider vinegary sort of dressing to go on top of it with a bit of rice and some vegetables.
That sounds lovely.
It's good.
My mouth is watering. Michael, I would love to talk more about all the other things that you can cook, but we've run out of time today. So I just want to say thank you so much for chatting to me today. It's been lovely to have you on the show.
Likewise, thank you.
And I'd love to invite you back and see how you're progressing in your journey, especially with your business story as well.
Yeah, we'd love to do that.
Fantastic. Well, have a safe journey home. And that's all we've got time for today on Health versus Wealth. So until our next episode, it's goodbye from me, Dr. Ben. So I do hope you enjoyed today's episode of Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben, and I hope it may help you improve your life and health. You can also take one easy step by achieving that right now by subscribing free on your usual podcast platform. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me on podcast@drfinlays.co.uk. I hope you'll join me again, but for now, it's goodbye from me, Dr. Ben.